everyone. Firstly, thank you for the invite. I really enjoyed the discussion. My name is Tsato Sibolai, and I work for Dot Active as a retail analyst. And I just quickly want to share a quick story of my experience before I ask a question. As Bheki mentioned, he's actually a good friend of mine for 10 years. Went to the same high school and had the same kind of influence. And I also had an experience to work at Leondale High School as a teacher's assistant while I was still studying. And basically what I want to ask is, because I had experience to work at a public school and the quality was really bad compared to going to Boxburg High. For example, I had the opportunity to be assistant coaching soccer team, and you'd find kids would come to school hungry, and there was no feeding scheme, and we'd go versus other schools who had like snacks and food, and we'd basically play with hungry kids. So my question is, how do you relay these points and this school of thought if, as you know, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if the basic needs are not covered? How can they relate to your thoughts if just the basic needs are not covered? That's my question.
Ah, amazing question.
It's a great question.
I'd like to first start with that, because that, asking those type of questions is what motivated me personally, because yeah, that is what I care about. But in saying how do they relate to these thoughts when their basic needs are not met, part of these thoughts is in making the meeting of those basic needs much more easier, right? Because I always find that when we're talking about, the satisfaction of people's needs, we tend to forget that everything has to come from someone actually being productive somewhere, and that person having to either have the ends of their productivity confiscated from them by force, or them trading them willingly, right? But when someone, as I said, there's a historical context in South Africa where people, at the very least, right, where first it was possessed of means for them to through subsistence sustain themselves, and through migration, and all of these things impacts on a starting point that is not as great. But the fundamentals of it is that there still has to be some production that happens, right, to meet those needs. And I find that when I talk about the idea that I believe in, because what motivated me is how do I get people fed, and until I realized that no, there are people who spend their entire days waking up in the morning, going to a night, using the Adam Smith analogy, without knowing the people who consume whatever it is that they're producing. But they do this. They do this, and they voluntarily exchange this with others. And then the other option is that we take whatever resources we have, in like natural resources really, and then we force people to work them and confiscate whatever ends that they have produced from them. That has been tried multiple times, and that does not work, because that incentive of producing for yourself is needed. So I find that at the very least, when talking about someone who's hungry, and how do I get them to relate to my ideas, I tell them that you need freedom to be able to go and make your own food, to be able to go and make, or at the very least make or produce means to be able to obtain your own food. And that is what I am arguing for. I'm arguing for the ability for everyone to, at the very least, should they desire to, have the means to make their own food. And with the means, of course, that we then go into property, and I am a huge proponent of like property justice and stuff like that, right? But at the very least, I think that the issue of hunger touches directly at what personally motivates me to be a proponent of the ideas that I am, because empirically it has been shown, the property rights create commerce, and commerce creates wealth, and wealth is what makes people's lives much more better. So you want to have more people having property rights, or producing individually and trading with one another, because that is what grows wealth, right? So yeah, I think that our ideas touch at the core of that too big.
May I go after
Yeah.
Zakes? So just to add a little bit of context of where this high school is. This high school is situated in the East Rand, Katlehong. And the area in which it's situated is a fairly, I would say, middle class area, predominantly black families that are within this area. Now, it is a public school, which means that it is the Department of Education that determines the structure of education, that determines the feeding scheme in which you said there, as well as like which teachers are teaching there as well. Now the issue with that school that Tato has mentioned is that it is heavily unionized. There's a teachers union in which bad lectures teachers are not fired. I believe the previous principal was fired, but it still has the same issues currently. I think the way in which you solve such issues is that you need to get the community involved. I think once people in this area in Katlehong realize how bad of a school it is, they also need to form a community to improve the school. Why am I mentioning this? I've seen, for example, Afrikaans schools that were started from scratch, but were built through contributing 50 rands, 100 rands. And when it's reported in the media, it's reported in a negative light and say like, they just want an Afrikaans school. But why can't we do it in our own communities as well? Why can't we also contribute meaningfully, contribute towards a feeding scheme, contribute towards having school kids having proper equipment to play soccer, having roofs. Some schools, for example, don't even have a roof. I know this because I attended winter schools in some of them. I think you need to strengthen the community. You know, we've spoken about delegating certain responsibilities towards the government, and we now have physical example where that leads us. We need to get the community involved to solve such issues.
Yeah, I agree. Pila,
Yeah, it's a very difficult question. So I'm not going to pretend I've got a solution to the problem. I don't. But I'm also not committed to a single position. So I'm open to having my mind changed. And what I'm sensing, especially from Zakes, is the commitment to a laissez-faire environment in which the government is not involved, that's restricting him from saying that there must be some support coming from somewhere. Now, I'm not saying it should come from the government. I'm just saying that to be too principally tied to an ideological position inhibits your ability to, I think, notice and relay what are quite obvious solutions. And what may be an obvious solution, and I mean, I speak under question here and people can obviously poke holes in what I'm saying. I think we need to have incentives for schools to either collaborate, for the government to either subsidize some schools. That's certainly not a position that I'm averse to. I do think that because I agree that in the long run, you want people to be productive. But the issue that we have in South Africa is that many people are not. And you cannot just go from a state of being not productive to being productive in the next instance. So something has to be done in the interim while people are still hungry. We can't let people starve to death while there are surplus resources that are elsewhere. Now, again, I don't know what the solution is. And I can hear Zakes is itching to come in here. I can hear that he's itching to come in here. So what I am going to say is that, so your question was, what do people who believe what you believe, and I'm rephrasing the question, what do people who believe what we believe have to say in the case of children who are going to school or participating in events hungry? Now, what I'm going to say in response to that is that there isn't a your position. So the three of us are very different people. Like, we believe three very different things. So I think people must realize that, in order to believe what we believe, there isn't a, what we believe. Like, there isn't a monolithic idea that we believe. There are a series of ideas that we believe, each of us committed to a different one, and each of us willing to compromise, I suppose is the right word, on certain positions. And I think that my mind remains open to the possibility of some either voluntary exchange between institutions, or some incentives put in place by the government, either tax breaks or things of the sort, for schools that are more affluent to assist those that are not, so that they can obviously trickle down the support to the kids that need that support. Again, it's an idea that I just fired off the hip. I don't know, but it does seem to me that we must be thinking a lot more clearly about this than I think we are prepared to think about it currently.